Retro Studios has been a prominent part of Nintendo, releasing tons of high-quality games over the years ever since the early 2000s. And after their success of the Metroid Prime trilogy, they decided to take a crack of reviving the Donkey Kong series with Donkey Kong Country Returns. This game was a phenomenal and challenging game on the Wii, and it was definitely a great return to form for Donkey Kong at the time, who was suffering greatly during the 2000s with, let's just face it, mostly mediocre titles. And with Nintendo's new console on the horizon, people were very curious on what Retro Studios had in store for the Wii U. Well, in 2013, we finally got our answer when they announced a sequel to Returns called Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which got me really excited at the time since I really adore Returns, and seeing a follow-up on an HD console was really cool. However, despite this game having an acclaimed reaction these days, when it was first announced and released, it was kind of treated unfairly at the time, as there were plenty of people that were kind of disappointed that Retro Studios was making a new Donkey Kong game. With one of the biggest examples being from Kotaku, where they released an article saying it was just another damn Donkey Kong game. Because we all know that Kotaku is a perfect site with nothing wrong with it. My guess being why people were a bit underwhelmed was that the Wii U was struggling at the time, and they thought that Retro could make a big blockbuster game for it, and they kind of viewed like a 2D platformer as not really that impressive. What also didn't help was that Metroid, the series that Retro helped give a big revival at the time, was struggling very badly after the failures of Other M. And they felt like maybe a Metroid game would be a grand way to have people incentivized of getting a Wii U. But that's my personal theory on it. I remember getting this game during my middle school years, and I played it to hell and back, and even picked up the Switch port years later. But it's been a while since I played this game, and since this game is turning 10 years old this year, I thought it'd be fun to talk about this game since it's the most recent Donkey Kong game in the series. And oh boy, we'll talk about that later. Now, with everything out of the way, let's get started. So the story of the game is that Donkey Kong's birthday is here, and the Kongs are celebrating at his hut. However, parties like these never go well, as outside of the island, a fleet of ships have arrived, and they are all being commanded by Lord Frederick, who blows into this giant horn that summons an ice dragon. The Kong family notice a breeze coming by, so when they investigated outside, they were immediately blown away by the dragon, allowing the Vikings to turn Donkey Kong's island into an icy fortress. And so it's up to the Kong family to travel through 6 different islands and try to save their home. So yeah, the antagonists this time were the Vikings, known as the Snowmads. And I'll be completely honest, as much as I like the designs a lot more than the Tiki Tak tribe, I kinda wish they kinda went back to K-Rool for this one. But I'm not that bothered by it, it's just more of a nitpick. So for the gameplay of Tropical Freeze, it's very similar to Returns, as most of the moves from the last game returns with a few new stuff. For one, the blow move from the last game that I'm pretty much most of you probably forgot until I mentioned it by now. Yeah, that's completely been omitted from this game, and honestly I don't really mind that because I always found that move as a bit of a pace breaker. Replacing that move, we have the pluck move similar to Mario 2, where Donkey Kong can pull things off the ground, which will either unlock secret passages, items, or barrels. Which is honestly a way better move for Donkey Kong, and it fits him better than just blowing on a dandelion. Not only that, but also the ground pound move from the previous game feels way more responsive more than ever thanks to new button controls, which is helpful for the fact that in this game, it relies on the 3DS button layout rather than the Wii version, as the Wii version, while runs at 60 FPS, was held back by certain people by the motion controls. While the 3DS version has the better button layout, however it was locked at 30 FPS since it was on the 3DS, so with Tropical Freeze, you have the button layout of the 3DS, but the 60 FPS version of the Wii. And what this basically means is that this game easily has the best control in any Donkey Kong Country game. I love how Donkey Kong jumps, I love the weight, and I just love how he feels when playing through the game. And that's not all, because he also has brand new arsenals up his sleeve thanks to the brand new Kong buddies. Diddy Kong once again returns as a power-up, but this time we have 2 more Kongs to help DK. Dixie Kong returns as one of the main characters since Donkey Kong Country 3, where she essentially uses her ponytail to give DK a double jump. And Cricket Kong also helps DK this time, where he uses a cane similar to Scrooge McDuck to make it as a pogo stick. It's very useful for avoiding various spikes and hazards, and he's apparently very popular in the speedrunning community because he carries so much momentum that he just flies through the areas. However, despite having 3 cons under your disposal, you'll most likely be using Dixie Kong throughout the game most likely. Because for most of the platforming, Dixie Kong is the most useful throughout. And unfortunately, as much as I love Diddy Kong, I love this little monkey guy, he is probably the least useful Kong throughout. As since he and Dixie Kong are very similar with their abilities, Dixie Kong is pretty much just a much more effective Diddy Kong. Because at least with Cranky Kong, there are certain areas where you need to use him because he's the only one that can go through hazardous spikes. And that even applies to other attributes that the Kong buddies can have. Like for example, there's this brand new move where if you gather enough bananas, you can do a special move called the Kong Pow, which is essentially a screen nuke as all the enemies on screen will turn into certain items. Like for example, if you have Diddy Kong on you, all the enemies in the game will turn into red balloons, giving you a lot more lives. But as for something like Dixie Kong, she essentially turned all the enemies into golden hearts, which not only gives you more health, but also gives you extra health, and so if you time it just right, you can essentially double your health. And that even goes for the underwater sections as well. Oh yeah, these returned from the SNES house as well, as it was completely absent in returns for some reason. However, it's not an exact replica because there's a bit more of interesting liberties with the underwater sections. Like for one, he has a brand new air meter this time, so he can't just hold his breath underwater indefinitely. And second, you're pretty much swimming through these underwater sections. I know this sounds weird, but the best way to describe the ones for the SNES days is that it was literally the equivalent of Super Mario Brothers. While in something like in Tropical Freeze, where it feels like more in line with something like Mario Galaxy swimming. Not only that, but also a lot of the Kong buddies that you have along the way have certain attributes underwater as well. But again, it's always best to try and use Dixie Kong because there are certain areas of the game where you can only access it with Dixie Kong. You know what this kind of reminds me of? The bikes from Mario Kart Wii, where even though I do love using the bikes and they are way damn fun to play through, they really make the carts very pointless to go through since the bikes were way more effective. But don't get me wrong, despite how very useful Dixie Kong is throughout the game, this game is still pretty damn challenging. And even if you're still using Diddy Kong and Cranky Kong, they're still very useful going throughout the levels. Because with the level design in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, it is honestly one of the best ones I've ever seen from a 2D platformer. The level design in Returns was pretty good, but it was a bit held back in certain aspects. Mostly due to the fact with some of the levels, it relies too much on do or die scenarios. Especially with the various vehicle sections of the game where it's a one-hit kill. But luckily in Tropical Freeze, they adjusted so you have 2 hits instead of just 1. I know it doesn't sound a lot, but it's honestly a lot more leg room than the previous game. And they just didn't stop there, they also overhauled a lot of things from these sections as well. Specifically stuff like the cannon barrels and minecart sections. In Returns, when you go to these sections, it pretty much treats itself as like another side-scrolling section. But when we head to the first cannon section in Tropical Freeze, for example, you're constantly rotating around this giant tree. And that's what a lot of these sections can do, you're constantly shifting around the area, making everything very 3-dimensional. I mean, the game already uses full 3D graphics, so why not take advantage of that? Not only that, but also thanks to this brand new depth, they were able to add brand new elements to returning stuff. Like in some of the minecart sections, you're able to jump between rail to rail, which is a nice evolution to these gameplay style. And that's what I can describe Tropical Freeze, it pretty much cranks everything up to 11 from Returns. Because with the setting of the previous game, it was pretty much on the safe side because it was a first entry in a really long time. But in Tropical Freeze, you have way more interesting variety and settings in this game. Whether it's going to the various fortresses of the Vikings, or going through this beautiful savanna, which has music that is very important with the gameplay. Or you're going through a giant factory where you're platforming on giant fruit where they're trying to make them into popsicle sticks. There are even various levels that reimagine some elements from Donkey Kong Country 2, as there is a level where you're traveling through a giant beehive, and even Bramble Scramble returns from Donkey Kong Country 2. And not just that, but also, since this is a Donkey Kong game, there are tons of collectibles as well. The Kong Letters return, and if you collect all of them, you unlock one more secret level. The Pulse Pieces allow you to unlock concept art in the gallery. And lastly, the Banana Coins return, and since Cranky Kong is traveling with you, the story is being run by Funky Kong this time, making his grand return to the mainline games. But anyway, so is everything about this game perfect? Well, mostly, but I do have a couple of gripes. For one, Rambi the Rhino returns once again as the only animal buddy this time, which is honestly a real shame because there was interesting potential of using other animal buddies. Like, since underwater swimming was returning, I think Ungar would have been a perfect fit, which would have been an interesting way to go over the current than just using Dixie Kong. That way the underwater sections can be a bit more balanced for the Kongs. And lastly, as for the bosses, even though I do really like them and they are way more memorable than the ones in the previous game, however, they still fall under the trappings of Returns where they pretty much just drag out the boss fights for a bit too long for my taste. I don't mind challenging boss fights, but I feel like the bosses here goes a bit too long for the type of game Donkey Kong Country is. But again, the boss fights are still really fun, I just feel like it could have been a bit shorter. But going back to the positive spectrum, the graphics in this game is fucking phenomenal. The level of detail and everything is just very breathtaking. Retro Studios really went all out to make every single level in this game feel very distinct from one another. And the most interesting part of all this is that everything feels very organic. Nothing just floats in the air. Everything just feels very cohesive and like it's an actual environment and not just like, oh hey, this area is just floating in the air. Why? I don't know. And this is just talking about the environments because even the character models themselves look excellent. Jumping from Wii to Wii U really shows, as Donkey Kong is rocking some pretty impressive fur detail which looks great even to this very day. And I have to mention this, I love how in the final island where we're traveling back to DK's island, all the levels in this area are based on the worlds from the previous game, now completely thrown into chaos thanks to the Arctic invaders. Which leads to honestly one of the best silhouette levels in the entire series. Especially with that excellent theme song, which brings me to the music in this game as well. Because in Tropical Freeze, they brought back David Wise, who made a brand new song for Donkey Kong for the first time in 9 years. With the last one before this being remixes of Donkey Kong Country 3 on the GBA. And my god, he went all out with the soundtrack, because this is honestly his best work since DKC 2. As this is probably one of the best soundtracks in any Nintendo game ever, and it's such a phenomenal evolution of the original Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. Hell, a lot of times I even listen to a lot of these songs in the background when I'm doing work or something. Which is honestly a real shame that at the time, people really overlooked this game because it was on the Wii U and such. If only it got a second chance! Oh hey, look at that! So with the launch of the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo consistently released a lot of their Wii U games onto the console, since they never really sold much on the dying system. They gave all these games a second chance, except for Yoshi's Woolly World, which got stuck with only a 3DS port. Nintendo, for the love of Christ, port this game to the Nintendo Switch. I really want to play Yoshi Woolly World on Switch. So yeah, since it released on the Nintendo Switch, it finally got the attention it rightfully deserved. And as for the new additions for this game, well, for one, it runs at 1080p this time, making this game a lot more crispier than usual. And secondly, you have a brand new mode in this game where you get to play as the coolest Nintendo character of all time, Funky Kong. He's essentially an easy mode in the game, but goddamn, he's a pretty fun one as well. He essentially has all the attributes of every single Kong in this game into one, with additional stuff as well. Like him having additional health and being able to breathe underwater thanks to his snorkel. But honestly, even though he is the easy mode, he is just really fun to go through. He's essentially a good speedrunning tool, as it's just really fun to see how fast you can get through the levels by using Funky Kong. After even beating the game, I tried him out, and goddamn, he's just really fun to go through. Especially with the bonus world in this game, which has 3 levels in this game, which is a lot more than the previous one, which only had a single level. And doing the final world unlocks hard mode in the game, which removes all the checkpoints in the game, and you have to go through the entire thing with one hit. But this is the only time where you get to choose every single Kong in this game, including the Barrel Buddies. Which honestly makes me ask, why couldn't I just choose them from the beginning? But beggars can't be choosers. This is honestly still a really nice bonus. So yeah, that is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, and overall, still a phenomenal masterpiece. This is honestly my favorite game that came out of Retro Studios, as this game just reeks with polish and quality that you would only expect from Retro Studios. They did an amazing job of revitalizing Metroid, and they did an excellent job of doing the DK games. Which honestly makes it even sadder. Despite all of this, there was just one big monkey wrench that came in the way. God dang it. I wrote this in the script and I didn't realize it now, I just accidentally made a pun. But anyway, so the main problem we have right now with Donkey Kong is that since this game is celebrating its 10-year anniversary, we have literally spent an entire decade with no Donkey Kong games. However, despite that sounding really bad, there is a certain silver lining to this, which is that even though that he's affiliated with Mario most of the time, Nintendo still consider him as a separate series. Even when they did the Mario movie, it was not just Donkey Kong, but his entire Jungle Kingdom and such. They really made a tribute to the Donkey Kong country in this movie. And even when they were doing cast announcements, when they got to Donkey Kong, they stated, even though this is a Mario movie, Donkey Kong will also make an appearance. Which implies is that Nintendo views Donkey Kong as its own series. I mean, hell, they're even doing a freaking theme park for Donkey Kong Country, so I do feel like Donkey Kong has a future for something. We're just gonna have to wait a little bit longer to see. But whatever Donkey Kong game release until then, I'll be here to talk about it. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye bye!